Hello, everyone. It's another Friday. That means today is a Friday Forum, and I'm so glad and excited to be here with you. As you're logging into the Friday Forum, please put your name and your location in the chat. This is our way of being able to help people to know who's here and where you're from. And it's especially helpful for my guests. Today I have Hannah Bookbinder, who is going to talk with us about the superpower of ADHD and the students that we all work with. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm a producer, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an educator. I teach for UCLA, and I also have the best audience in the world. So I'm glad you're here with me today. And we have a lot of opportunities and fun talking about things that are important to us, subjects that are either in education or in business that can help us better serve the families that we serve. So thank you for everybody being here today. And Hannah, thank you for being here too.
My pleasure. It's great to be with all of you.
So as people are logging in and as you can see where everybody is coming from, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your background is.
So, I own a private practice called Academic Ally, which is located in suburban Philadelphia. And we work with individuals who either have ADHD or they struggle with executive functioning skills. And I say or because you can struggle with executive functioning skills, but you don't necessarily qualify for the diagnosis of ADHD. So people come to us because they are late for their deadlines, they're losing things. You know, the joke that we have with some of our students is that you can follow the trail of where they've been throughout the course of the house because they just leave things with the, wherever they go, left and right. And at the end of the day, the goal is for the individuals we work with to become successful at home and at school and to carry these skills forward with them when they enter into the workforce.
I think that's such an important goal, and it's one that for years, ADHD wasn't even identified or
Mm.
even recognized. My husband had ADHD growing up as a child, and his parents took him to a psychologist to find out what was wrong with him. And, it would be very frustrating when he would go in and ace a test, but never turned in any homework.
Right.
And, it's just, and yet he had a photographic memory, all these things. So, of course, now I have a son who had ADHD. And so, seeing the difference. So, from this perspective, you've built your expertise and your knowledge. Where did that come from? How did you become such an expert in this?
So I actually started off in the mental health field, and at the time that I had graduated from graduate school, ADHD was starting to bubble to the surface as an official diagnosis, and people were actually starting to take it seriously. And I worked very closely with somebody who was an expert in the area, and he was my mentor, and I did trainings. And here we are 25 plus years later, and this is one of my favorite groups of people to work with because they're just mind-bogglingly incredible individuals. You know, that they're so creative, they are compassionate, they are hysterically funny. I've heard some really great jokes from people I've worked with. So, I enjoy being a part of their team, and I love the fact that I can collaborate with parents, if we're talking about students, with teachers, with other experts who are in the field, like psychologists and psychiatrists, and that we can all come together for the benefit of this individual.
And I think that's the key. And I think that's one of the differences in the educational approach now. What you're talking about is identifying students and being able to work with them where they're at and build on their strengths rather than this concept of there's something wrong with them that needs to be fixed. So, talk to
Exactly.
us a little bit more about that.
So you're talking about like looking at it from a strengths perspective.
Hmm.
The what they bring to the table is a number of incredible aspects. You know, I was just a little while ago talking about compassion. These individuals know what it's like to live in a world that's not going to bend to them. They know that they're going to have to figure things out on their own, and then many of them have had to be very scrappy. So anytime they see somebody who is different, whether it's because they also are neurodivergent or they have diabetes or they have to wear glasses or whatever, these are some of the people who will reach out first to other people just to let them know, I understand, a little bit about what you're going through, even if it's something completely different. They're also exceptionally resilient. They get knocked down and they keep getting back up again. They know how to creatively troubleshoot. It might be sort of outside of the box, but they're figuring it out, whatever works for them. And we talk about that in my office all the time. It doesn't have to be something that is necessarily specific to what the teacher or the coach or whatever is asking of you. If it is going to work for you and you're going to get to the same
Mhm.
finish line, then go for it.
Mhm.
They're determined. They're not going to quit. They are also extremely, they have the ability to focus, which surprises a lot of people. If they find something that they're really passionate about, which many of them have a lot of passions,
Mhm.
they can lock and load and stay focused for hours on end, sometimes to the point where I've had parents call me and say he won't put his books down. Like he will not put his books down. He's reading, he's reading, he's reading, which is it's so amazing to hear because a lot of the times I'm hearing, they won't put their phones down. They won't put the whatever the screen thing is down. So they bring a lot to the table, and they're very, very smart as well. And that's part of what their frustration is because they know intellectually they're capable of achieving, but because of this difference that they have, there's such a disparity between their ability and what they actually are able to put out there.
Yeah, and that's where, because our educational system and our even our society is sometimes they're this round peg and a square hole, or I don't know the other way around, a square peg and a round hole. Like it doesn't
Either
fit
way, it's not
anymore.
fitting.
Yeah, either way. And so I think as you're talking, it sounds like they have to have that creativity and that resilience and that determination in order to combat, not necessarily combat it, but to manage that and to really thrive and excel. Um, Oftentimes, I think we as educators and consultants and parents will see students who children are able to do that at a younger age, but as they go through the educational system, then they start running into roadblocks. So, what is your experience in that regard?
The roadblocks that they run into would include, they're always late for their handing in their assignments. They're losing their assignments. That sometimes they're not even aware of the fact that they have an assignment or an exam, and they come into class and the teachers say, "Okay, everybody put everything away. Now we're having a test," and they're caught completely off guard. So there's a lot of frustration that takes place both on the side of the student as well as the parents. The teachers get frustrated. The peers get frustrated with the kids who tend to be impulsive with their behavior. They're calling out during class, and kids don't take kindly to that because they know that everybody is going to reap the wrath of the teacher as a result. Um, and they're not studying properly, and socially their peers beyond outside of the classroom, they also face challenges as well because these kids can't follow through on what it is that they said that they would do. So they're constantly letting everybody down, and they're surrounded by people who are always disappointed by them, and that's a lot to bear for a kid, no matter what their age is.
So, how do you help them refocus the students? We'll talk about students right now, and then to the parents to refocus on their strengths and what you like to call their superpowers. How does that work?
So first I talk with them about what they see as their strengths because they are, a lot of them, extremely aware of what it is that they bring to the table. They just haven't had that opportunity to be able to sit back and relish in that because
Mhm.
they've been constantly dealing with this ongoing stream of disappointment and failure. So the first thing I do is that I hit pause. And sometimes we need to have the parents weigh in because a lot of times I ask that question of the kids and they look at me like deer in the headlights. Some of them because they are, uncomfortable feeling as though they're bragging about themselves,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
which I can understand, which is part of why, when they have to write those essays for college, they hide under the desks. Um, but to reassure them that they are not bragging, they are being honest with what it is that they are capable of doing and what they admire about themselves. And so from there, I will also ask them to highlight specific times in which they have evidence that suggests that they were smart, organized, creative, what have you. And that helps them to sort of grease the wheel a little bit. And then from there, be able to say, okay, I am capable of doing these things. And then from there, we come up with what our goals are and what the plan of action is going to be. And we identify what the obstacles might be and how we're going to address them as a result.
So, so how do you have them reflect back and come up with that evidence of when they were demonstrating these different traits? Do you have them do a journal? Do you have them make a checklist? What are some strategies, specific strategies that you use to help them?
In conversation, I'm asking them to identify, to think back to a time specifically when they met with success. And it could be great or small. It could be that they knocked it out of the ballpark when it came to executing on a project of some kind. It could be small, like they were able to help somebody in their time of need. Even if it was just passing over a pencil from one desk to another, because that is being helpful. Um, Outside of the office, I'm asking them to do a little bit of reflection. What were the top five of the day? And
Hmm.
what were the top, the bottom five, and to keep that record over the course of the week so that they can see they really are doing things well. They are meeting their goals or they're getting praised for it. I mean, sometimes they don't even recognize that they've done something amazing, and they need like a teacher to point out to them that, hey, Cyndy, you did really, really well in your presentation today.
And so those top five are top five experiences or top five emotions. Explain that a little bit more.
So top five could be anything. It could be, I cleaned up my space after lunch and mom praised me for it, or I put my things away, or I managed to get to work on time. Anything that they're
Mhm.
doing that puts a smile on their face and makes them feel good. Like I said before, it doesn't have to be this huge thing where they invented the cure for cancer. It,
Right.
it can be something that is personally meaningful for them or that meant something to somebody else, just to, shed light on the fact that that was a positive experience.
And it sounds like a shift in the mindset, right? Instead of all, not only for students, but for us as adults working with students, teachers, educators, parents, it's not looking at what you did wrong, but looking at what you did right and looking for that and evidence of that. And that goes a long ways for any student, neurodivergent
Right.
or neurotypical, but specific, especially for neurodivergent students as well, to help them shift their mindset is so key, and also to help parents. So what advice do you have for us as counselors and advisors? How do we be able to recognize and help students leverage those traits as well?
So I think that it's really important, first of all, to when you're working with your students, to be working within context. At some point, you become very familiar with how your students work and how they don't. And I think that within that context, it's important to point out the victories. What might be terrific for one kid, if he or she is suddenly aware of other and demonstrates that by sharing the pencil, for example, or sharing their notes, that might be something that is not an appropriate accomplishment compared to another kid who's way beyond that point, and the other kid is struggling to get their assignments completed. So the as far as helping them, remind me of the question again, Cindy. Sorry.
How do we help them recognize and leverage those traits? for how do we identify them and then help the students to identify them?
So judging within context is important. And then also, just catching them, asking them throughout the course of the day when you meet with them, what went well today? What are
Hmm.
you proud of? What if you could hang it up on the refrigerator with a magnet, what would you broadcast to the world and say, hey, I did really, really well today on this. And to maybe even keep track of that. I like to use Google Docs.
Hmm.
So that they can go back to it and just see this long record of things that they have accomplished. And that's not to say either, by the way, that you're not going to acknowledge the areas where they still need to work,
Right.
because I think that's being disingenuous. But I think that, one of the things that I would also advise counselors to do is to point out that when we make mistakes, there's an opportunity there for us to learn and to grow. I think where it becomes a true failure is when we fail to realize A, that we made a mistake, and B, how we could grow from it so that the next time we're in that set of specific circumstances, we don't take advantage of that opportunity to grow. Then it's a failure.
Hmm. Hmm. And yeah, and then that demonstrates to them that we are, we're all human, and it's part of the whole process of being human.
Right.
Um, how do you, going back to strategies and identifying strategies, we know with ADHD in particular, the executive functioning, as you said, homework goes in the backpack and never came out. Um, they don't know about tests, all these different things. So, what are some strategies that can be used or leveraged for students in to help them to learn and manage that?
So you started off with a really good example, and that's the homework. It often becomes pulverized and can be used, as mulch out in the garden. So I think, this idea of everything having a home is really important. So if you have one of the things that I like to use with my students is an accordion folder that's divided by subject, and each of those
Hmm.
sections is labeled. And in the front, I love having a shove spot. So whether they're using an accordion folder or they're using a binder, there needs to be, or even a separate two pocket folder, there needs to be a spot where the kid can shove their paper content and then bring it home. And then the first thing that they do when they start their homework is to unshove their shove spot, file everything appropriately, because teachers are notorious and professors are notorious for handing out that valuable piece of information right as the bell is ringing or right as
Yep.
everybody's leaving from
Yep.
the lecture. So having an organized shove spot, it doesn't even have to be organized, just stick the piece of paper into this location and then you know that it's there. You don't have to worry about losing it. When you get home, unpack it and put it into the appropriate spot. I think that doing using something like a slam dunk Sunday where you sit down every Sunday and you look ahead to see what's coming down the pipeline. What are my obligations? What are my appointments? Is there anything strange or weird going on? Like, do I have to go? My aunt Anne is getting married at the end of the week. Do I need to go to a rehearsal of some kind? And so therefore maybe I have to front load my work. Come
Hmm.
up with a strategized plan that will enable you to meet all of these goals and obligations that you have to complete. Check them off as you go. I think that it's really important also to lean on others. There's nothing wrong with that. And to send out an SOS to people to say, hey, mom or professor or friend, I'm working on this and I just wanted to let you know because there's research to show that if you report to somebody else what it is that you're up to, you have a greater likelihood of that follow through that comes with it.
Hmm.
On the other hand, if that notification is not enough, then you can ask them to check back in with you and say, I should have it done by Thursday at 3:30. If you could, hit me with a text or a phone call after 3:30 sometime on Thursday, I would really appreciate it. And there's no shame in that. And I think that
Right.
one of the things that I talk with my students about is the importance of advocacy and asking for help. And
Hmm.
that teachers and professors understand that for a lot of students, this is very difficult, whether you're neurodivergent or not,
Right.
and that they appreciate the outreach because they know that the kid is taking the class very seriously. I jokingly say, which is really not a joke, that it gives the teacher or the professor an opportunity to sort of boast about what it is that they know and be able to give some extra information that, class time wouldn't allow for. So you might learn about, I forgot who it was, but there was a grizzly bear who was involved in some sort of operation in World War II, and they could spout off about that, which, could help facilitate a nice personal relationship with the student and the teacher as well. So those are just, some examples of strategies that, I use with my students. And the other is to help them with dialing in is to eliminate their distractors. So if you know, for example, that you're prone to being distracted by the ringing and the dinging of your phones and your notification, then it might be a good idea to either keep that phone outside of your workspace or to turn on airplane mode. I'm telling you, I learn all the time from my students. One of my students taught me the value of being able to turn on airplane mode. Even though he's not traveling, he's not getting any
Mhm.
alerts or notifications and he can focus. So
Mhm.
the ability to dial in and pay attention to what you're doing, you can set yourself up for success.
I think, yeah, I mean, our students find these things and they will often create their own accommodations. They become very aware of, what their needs are and all, but trying to be their own advocate, that is so hard. And it's an essential skill for them to learn as they get ready to go on to college, because once they get to college, they can't have mom and dad, teacher, principal, counselor advocate for them. They have to advocate for themselves. And we just did a Friday forum on that with directors from the University of Michigan Disability Office and Illinois Urbana, and we talked about that. So I'll link that in our show notes as well. But how young should this start, Hannah?
I think that you can start as young as, kindergarten. There needs to be a system of organization. You could start organization as young as preschool. Everything has a home. So when you come in from preschool or from playing with your friends, your shoes go here, your sporting equipment goes in the garage in the ball bucket. From a parenting perspective, there's a lot of front loading when it comes to these things. Kids need to, and they thrive on having structure and predictability. So if
Mhm.
they know that there is a ball bucket and my basketball goes into the ball bucket, if they know that there's a shoe rack, the shoes go on the shoe rack, and it just becomes clockwork and it becomes routine. It's not to say that you are not going to have to adjust it every once in a while to accommodate, developmental milestones and responsibilities. They can even pitch in with caring for a pet because that's something that
Mhm.
requires routine and attention. And there's no reason why they can't learn how to walk the dog with an adult, depending on how old they are,
Mhm.
change the water, participate in feeding the pet. These are all things that can start at a very early age.
Right, right. And that is very true. And so then it builds some habits and some mindsets that can continue forward. Um, One thing that in our experience, in my experience with my son who had ADHD, was when he was in elementary school, we would do the spelling test. You know how they have to do the spelling test and they have to write it down 5 times, and we would practice, practice, practice. And then when he came and did the test, it would go all out the window. I knew he knew the words because we had done them together. But then when he did the test, they wouldn't, he couldn't pass the test on a consistent basis. So I was able to bring in, went to a learning specialist, and we decided to throw out the whole write the words 5 times and just threw it out. And we did crosswords, we did hangman, I found some very early apps. So sometimes thinking outside the box, if you're a square peg in a round hole, then you got to go find that square pot thing that nobody else or the school may not provide to you. But if it helps you get the same outcome, then what difference does it
Why
make?
not? Why
Yeah.
not? And you're going to save your child and you so much frustration and further a further toll on your relationship because the heat is going to be lowered, and your kid is also going to see that you're willing to recognize what they are all about, what their profile is, and that you're willing to meet them where they are so that they can start to be successful in their own right. And there are sometimes, situations, unfortunately, where the school is not going to meet the kid where they're at. And then you have to, decide, do you take it, do you escalate it? Do you talk to the learning support team? Do you take it to the principal? And unfortunately, there are some families who have to leave their school to go to one that's going to meet the kid where he or she is at.
Yeah, yeah. And if you have other learning differences, a medical, like epilepsy or anything else, seizure, anything, diabetes, whatever the other compounding factor might be, then that really adds to the level of complexity of what needs to be done.
Right.
So, a lot of times in schools, well, let me ask this question. Do you need to have an IEP to get that kind of a team approach or a support?
You don't have to get necessarily an IEP. You could also get a 504. It depends on what the school environment is. Private schools also create the equivalent to an individualized educational plan, but they don't call it an IEP. So you really have to have a good understanding of what it is that the protocol calls for in your child's school, and then follow that in order to make sure that your child is getting the accommodations that they need.
And so, how can parents or counselors as advisor be proactive in that?
So, when you recognize that your child is demonstrating repeated difficulty under certain circumstances or just across the board, I would encourage parents to reach out to the teacher and say, look, this is what I'm observing. Interestingly, I would also reach out to the teachers. The kids, a lot of times, do a very good job of what I call masking. They, put on a
Mhm.
good show, good performance in school, and then when they come home, they absolutely fall apart. And the kid that the teachers are seeing in school is very different from the kid that the parents are seeing at home.
Yeah,
And sometimes the teachers do not appreciate the fact that even though Frankie got all A's on the report card, they don't see the blood and the tears that are dripping from those A's on that report card. And
right.
so it really requires a partnership to take place between the parents and the teaching staff to figure out what is going to be the best direction for this kid. And then from there to figure out what are the appropriate accommodations. Because what works for one child is not necessarily going to work for another. And even if they don't necessarily need to have those accommodations on a regular basis, at
Mhm,
least the kid has them and they can use them whenever they need them. And
mhm.
that's one thing that I also point out for the kids who are going to college. You may not always want to have somebody taking notes for you, and you can take your own notes, but it's really helpful to know that you can access somebody else's notes, whether it's a fellow student or it's a professor. It's helpful to know that those are there in the event that you have an off day and you just totally spaced out when the professor was lecturing about something. You can fall back on that.
Mhm. And we're going to come back to that. I think that's another really good uh, nice to have a list and have this in your back pocket sort
Right.
of if you need it. And that goes with being able to build that environment and build that advocacy as well. We always would at the beginning of the year I'd have a student study team meeting, and we'd
Hmm.
go over with the new teachers and the counselor and the vice principal, okay, here's what you need to be aware of, and this is, and we always, my son was there too as part of this meeting. There wasn't all the adults talking about him,
Right.
but here's what my needs are, and trying to just give an opportunity to start the year off in the right foot so that there was an awareness, because they do. I mean, when we first had my son diagnosed, the teacher's like, why are you doing this? Well, he does fine. And then
Right.
after he came and we started, he actually started him on some medication at that time. They came out, oh, now we see the difference. You know,
Right?
he could do things, math problems and stuff that before it would get him done, but it took forever. And then he could just do them like that. And they're like, oh, now we get it.
Right,
But they were,
exactly.
yeah, they were questioning me as a parent. I was like, why are you worried about this? He's just normal young man. Well, I know what he's capable of, and we know what we're going through at home. So,
Yeah.
um,
And I would not ignore mother's intuition. You know, parents know their kids and dads too. Parents really understand their kids 9 times out of 10. And I wouldn't ignore that. And I would place a lot of value and listen in on what it is that they're telling you about their kid. So when parents are vetting you as a counselor, I think that it's really important for you to hear their insights. And granted, sometimes they're a little overboard, but I think that it also helps, particularly if you're working with older students. I always like to have an intake with the student present because then you get a 360-degree perspective. And you
mhm.
can start to fill in the gaps and you can start to see, what the dynamic is here.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, what are some of those strategies? You've explained a few strategies. What are some other strategies that you have found work with students that you recommend for them, especially as they're getting into high school or preparing to go to college?
I think especially as kids are older, they are very self-aware. They know what works and what doesn't work for them. So I make use of the metaphor of or an analogy of a video game. A lot of our students know how to play video games, and
Yeah.
this is the video game of education and success. So how are you going to outsmart yourself? You are the player, and your ADHD or your neurodivergence is the competitor here. So knowing that, if you know, for example, that you are a better morning person than you are in the afternoon, then maybe you want to front load yourself with classes in the morning. And maybe you want to have an easier afternoon. So if you have to take a class, then maybe you take, the art of bread making or something that's going to be tapping into your creative juices, something that will be of interest to you and not as much of an
Mhm.
energy and focus suck. I think that in that same spirit of outsmarting yourself, where do you like to work? Are you somebody who likes to have ambient chatter around you? So maybe you want to work in the more active side of the library, or maybe you want to go to a coffee house. Starbucks set up work areas like this throughout across the country and around the world for a reason.
Yep.
On the other hand, maybe you need to be in dead silence. So then you make sure that you prioritize arranging a reservation for a quiet space in the library or a quiet space that you know works in the dorm. Those are some things that I frequently harp on with my kids. I think, again, the importance of advocating for themselves. Um, is important no matter if it's with a parent, if it's with your friends, if it's because friends can upset us. So it's important to have that advocacy there as well.
Mhm.
And I think that in addition to all of these other areas, it's really important to do what I call the 6 pillars, which are, if you think about it, you're building your house of success. And do you want to be building your beachfront property on a concrete slab, or do you want to be building it directly onto the sand? If you're building it on the sand, that's fine, but know that that foundation is going to be constantly shifting and you're going to constantly have to fix your house. So if you sort of give into and look at this idea of having 6 pillars, you establish your beachfront property on concrete. So what does that look like? We're talking about making sure that you're eating foods that are high protein, complex carbohydrates that are going to last a long time. They're going to be able to fuel you. Your brain is going to be able to concentrate better and you're going to be able to stabilize your mood. Same thing for hydration. And I always emphasize the fact that I'm talking about water and nothing else. Um, their
Guys
eyes
on the
get
tea
really
doesn't
big.
count, huh?
Right. Their eyes get really big and they're like, drinking? And I'm like, no, water. So, making sure that they're having at least 90 ounces of water a day is important, and you can spread that out throughout the course of the day. And there are all kinds of water vessels that you can get now. Where I know that there's one on the market. It's massive and it's not too strong either. Where you have demarcations on the side of it as to when you should be drinking so much by what period of time.
Oh,
Um,
mhm.
you want to make sure that you're getting enough sleep, which is always really tricky for kids as they're getting older because their bodies are shifting and the clock is shifting for them. And I think a lot of adults don't understand that they are now wired toward the later hours of the night, and which
Right.
pushes their wake up time to the later hours in the morning. So again, if that's you, then don't be setting yourself up for failure with an early morning class. Bump your class times
Right.
to later in the day. You want to make sure you're getting enough exercise. Get your heart rate up at least 3 or 4 times a week for at least 30 minutes. And that could be anything from, jumping rope to climbing to rope climbing and wall climbing, running, biking, you name it, whatever works for you. And you don't have to do it alone. You can do it with friends. Make sure that you're allocating time to hang out with your friends and socialize and have some downtime because you can't be on all the time. And then the other thing is to make sure that you are aware of what it is that you're feeling and deal with those feelings because it's sort of like having a boiling pot of water on your stove top. If you're not paying attention to what the temperature is, at some point everything is going to boil over and it's going to become a super big mess. So if you can use those 6 pillars as your foundation, then all of these other things become much easier to manage. You can focus, you can stay organized, you can be much more cognizant of what your time parameters are. Those things are great sources of assistance to this population.
So restate just the words that you use for the six pillars. You've described them. So the six pillars are what?
So it's hydration with
Mhm.
water. It's making sure that you are eating complex carbohydrates and protein. You're exercising. You're making time for fun. You're getting proper sleep, and you're dealing with your feelings.
Oh, that's great. Now, you have done something with all of this so that it brings it so that we can read about this and learn about this. And you actually even have an app on this. So tell us about your book, first of all. And why did you write a book about this and what's in your book?
So I made the book and the app because there are only so many hours in the day, and my husband accuses me of this all the time. I am a heart on my sleeve kind of a gal, and I just want to help as many people as possible, but I need to be able to get my 6 pillars taken care of. So, in the absence of being able to do that, I created the book and the app so that people anywhere, anytime can have support that they need and meeting their organizational and time goals. The book is called Unlock Your Inner Superhero: Conquering the Challenges of ADHD, and it's made for students who are neurodivergent who have ADHD to do a few things. One is to validate their experience because one of the number one themes that I have that takes place in my office is the fact that these kids feel so misunderstood and mislabeled. They're labeled as lazy and defiant and argumentative and unmotivated. And that, I mean, we've talked about this now for over 30 minutes. And we know that they're not. So I wanted them to know that I hear their dilemma and I hear their experience, and it's all very valid. But I also wanted to remind them that they also have strengths. And we spoke to those earlier in the conversation because it's so easy to lose sight of that. And then I wanted to empower them with my clinically proven strategies that I use in my office. So everything is in this book that I have used over the course of almost 30 years. And it's a very ADHD friendly book. You don't have to read it cover to cover. It's divided up into bullet points because I know span is very short. And
Mhm.
there's also points of reflection in the book. And parents are also using it as a handbook, teachers and coaches, so that they can have a better understanding of the individuals that they're working with. And in turn, they've been able to better support them. So that was the premise for the book. The app is called My Toad app, TOAD, and Toad stands for time management, organization, accountability, and dialing in. And those are four of some of the most important executive functioning skills that we all need to have.
Mhm.
And on any given day, we all have multiple things that we need to do and can get really lost in the shuffle of daily life. So this app takes everything and streamlines it down into one convenient location within this app, where with four suites of tools that address the time management and the organization, accountability, and dialing in, people can start to meet their deadlines, they can become organized, they can become more productive, and then they can lower their stress and their anxiety that they're having. Because I know many people who are watching this know for a fact that their clients are getting very stressed and overwhelmed, as are their parents. And so this accomplishes that. And I think that for everybody at the end of the day, that's what it is that they want. They would just want to have a little bit of peace of mind.
Yeah. And that peace of mind is so transformative. It just can make such a big difference, both
Yes.
for our students, for the parents, for the family, and I love the whole aspect of looking at it as this is your superpower. You
Mhm.
know, again, this is not something we're going out there to fix. You don't need to fix. You need to identify what this is and how you can use it,
Right.
they do, they create such wonderful transformative approaches to life and the world and everything else. But I do know, like in talking with my son, to hear him talk about how his brain works, it works very different than the way my
Yes.
brain does. And so I wish I had known much sooner that that was the case. And I don't know that my husband ever got a chance to really explore that or understand that about himself. So I think that that can be such an important aspect. So, as a counselor and somebody with these years of knowledge and expertise, if you could give one piece of advice to college counselors working with ADHD students, what would it be?
I think that it's really important to recognize that when you embark on a journey with a student, this is a partnership. I always tell my students that they are in the pilot seat. I'm the co-pilot. I'm just going to tell you that, you got a flock of geese flying at you and you need to either increase your altitude or go down. And that because they are in the pilot seat, it's really important to ask them questions. What's important to them? What are their goals for working with you? What do they want to get out of this relationship? What are the traditional stumbling blocks that they've encountered, and how have they addressed them in the past? And has that worked for them? Are there other things that they haven't tried that they haven't applied to certain situations before? Asking them their opinion about the advice that you're offering. So, if one of your students gives you a scenario and you say to them, well, I'm wondering how you would feel about doing X, Y, and Z. That I'm wondering question is a very powerful opportunity to gain insight from your student. And if there's anything that I would say to you is just twofold. You are a partner, and this is the two of you working together. And using that I'm wondering question can be very insightful, not just for you, but also for the student as well.
I think that is powerful. It also brings to mind another question. Are, as counselors, advisors, and I have found this especially true in my practice, a lot of times students and parents don't realize the students haven't been identified as neurodivergent. They haven't been identified with ADHD. So when you're meeting with a student or parent and these things are coming up, how do you handle that where they aren't even aware? What are the steps that you should take as a counselor advisor in that regard?
I kind of, it depends on the family, but in general, I tend to open the conversation with the parents to say, has anybody ever talked to you about the possibility that so and so might have ADHD? And to also say, unless you are, to say, I'm not an ADHD expert, but I've been watching your son, daughter, child. And in the course of my work with them, I've come to be aware of a few things that I wanted to bring to your attention. It's hard to maintain their focus. They're very disorganized. They're always late for our appointments. They talk about how they miss deadlines. Those tells that are typically symptomatic of ADHD, and to encourage them, to maybe they want to investigate it, they can consult with a psychologist to see if they could get evaluated, or if they're, still in school, that the school district could support an evaluation to have that done. You never want to claim to be an expert unless you are. And
Mhm.
to acknowledge for them, if there are tears or whatever, that to acknowledge that this can be a very upsetting thing to hear, that there's something, gone amiss with your child, because, as far as we're all concerned, our children are perfect. But unfortunately, none of us gets away with a scot-free dance card. We all have something that we have to carry with us, and that, you'll be there to support the child, and you just wanted to open up that conversation with them, and see. And it's shocking to me, because sometimes parents have said, yes, I have long suspected that. And I'm thinking to myself, it might have been helpful if you had told me that at the beginning of this conversation. But, there's a level of shame that's involved, there's a level of fear that's involved. And so it's all very understandable as to why they might not have told you what their suspicions were.
Yeah, yeah. That is very, very true. And I think because I see that a lot. I've had that happen a lot because we're not in an area where neurodivergence is really recognized,
Right.
or still has a stigma. And so oftentimes I'll bring it up with parents. Have you noticed that your child doesn't turn things in, that X, Y? Yeah, we just thought, and then those labels come out. We thought they
Right.
were not focused, we thought they were lazy, they weren't trying hard enough. Like, no, there's other reasons. And sometimes they're very relieved to hear that there are reasons behind this. And
Yes.
Lucinda just asked the question, like literally as I was asking you this. So it is definitely something that we all run into. And she says, how does an IEC help a family if a family thinks there is an issue? I don't want to overstep. So I think
Yeah.
we've addressed that. Is there anything else you would say? Like she's recognizing that the family says they think their junior has ADHD.
Right.
Sometimes they're not even that far. And I've had a lot of families who had no idea. They don't know
Right.
anything about, and they're not in the education space. So I'm
Right.
an educator. I can recognize that. But if you're, running equipment or doing other things, you don't know that those are things to be aware of.
Right. This
So,
is just how their kid is. And
mhm.
I would say that, I think that you mentioned the word lazy, and I don't subscribe to that. 99% of the time, I think that there's a reason why the kid is lazy. They don't like the teacher, they don't like the subject. The class is right after lunch, it's later in the day, and as opposed to how they're performing earlier in the morning. There's something that's going on, physically with them as far as their health is concerned. There was something stressful that happened in the course of their life. There's something going on at home that's stressful, or they're neurodivergent. And so there's any number
Right.
of reasons why this kid is not plugging in and meeting with success. So to slap a label of lazy on there, I think is usually inappropriate.
Mhm.
And or it could also be that they're so exceptionally bright, and because of their inability to follow through on these executive functioning skills, they don't perform up to their capabilities, so they're put down they're put in classes that are beneath their ability, and they get
Yep.
bored,
Yep.
so they're not
Yep.
going to engage.
Yep.
So all of these factors are possible explanations for why this kid is not doing what it is that they need to do, and that mystery has to be solved.
True, true. And it takes time and it takes patience and it takes that team approach as well. But
100%.
sometimes you can be, as a college advisor, kind of the spark that ignites that exploration. And
Right.
as you said, it can be any number of things, and we can't diagnose that. But you can reach out to people who can, whether, the school districts. I mean, here in the US, the school districts are required, you can request a testing and they are required. I have found in my experience that takes a long time. Sometimes the testing is not as thorough as it needs to be. So when families have the resources to get private testing, oftentimes is more, it's a speedier answer, but still, that's what the school, I mean, I worked as a school counselor and we would get those requests and things like that. So,
Yeah,
um,
they have 60 school days to respond to that request, but that request has to be in writing.
yeah, yep.
And, I think both from an ethical and support perspective, but also from a marketing perspective, it would behoove the college counselors to kind of align themselves with psychologists who are in their community so that they can
Mhm.
sort of refer back
Mhm.
and forth to each other because
Yep.
it's a great source of support for the families, but it's also a great support for your business as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely, because the psychologists will get students in, they'll run them through their evaluation, say, okay, here's what you are.
Right.
Now you need support, and they can refer them to you, and vice versa. And that's exactly what I was able to develop. Usually, parents would have to go to their primary physician, get a referral in order to go have the testing. I have a psychologist who knows my work, knows that I know what I'm doing. And if I tell this family, go talk to this psychologist, she
Right.
waives all that and they can just go right in and get the testing done. So
Yeah.
that makes a big help. Well, we have run out of time. I have one more question I just want to touch on briefly, and then want to get your information so people can reach out to you if you want. As we're talking about these things, what we haven't talked about is the cultural aspect. Because, here in the US, there's a lot more awareness, but I know as an instructor in the UCLA program, other cultures are not as accepting or haven't built as much awareness of neurodivergency, especially ADHD. So, what is your recommendation, or what do you see in terms of how do you handle that cultural aspect, Hannah?
If I'm working with multicultural families.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you have to use the same level of sensitivity as you do with the family and the other scenario that we were talking about before to, um, ask them if they notice that their child is demonstrating these kinds
Mm-hmm.
of symptoms at home and to also give them some resources. So, I mean, you wouldn't want to throw necessarily my entire book at them, but you certainly, in preparation for a meeting, there are pieces of chapter one, for example, that define what ADHD is and what the symptoms are. Um, but to give them some kind of concrete material to look over and consider, and then also to say to them, I'd love to follow up with you afterwards to see if you have any questions or concerns. I do have other, people who could point you in the right direction as far as, maybe an evaluation and what that process would be like. So, to just like gently but firmly introduce this idea that it's
Mm-hmm.
within the realm of possibilities, that this is not something to be ashamed of, and that there is help that's available. It is the most treatable psychological, neuropsychological disability that's out there. And if we can just get the kid in the right hands, then and get the right treatment, then they're going to be okay.
And that's what parents want to hear.
Yes. Yes.
That's what the students want to believe.
Right.
And that's what we as college advisors want to provide, is give
Right.
them that
Have
that
that
hope
peace of
and that,
mind.
yeah. that peace of mind. Absolutely. Hannah, thank you so much for being here today. How
And my
can somebody
pleasure.
get a hold of you?
So you can email me at Hannah, which is HANNAH, at academically.com. That's the word academic, followed by the hyphen sign, and then ally is ALLY.com. You can go to the website for our app and our book information. It's www.mytoad, TOAD, app.com. App is APP. And we have all kinds of information about executive functioning skills there, and it's a whole wonderful resource for anybody who's interested.
Oh, that's great. And if I'm going to share kind of what's coming up in the next few weeks, if you could type your email into the chat, then everybody will have it. And I'll put it in the show notes as well. So
Perfect.
thank you very much. This concludes our webinar for today. I hope I've learned a lot and it's been very affirming. So Hannah, thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge and your
Thank you.
expertise. We are going to be back next week. I have Harlan Cohen. He's going to come and he's going to talk about your best first year. You know, transition is another thing I'm very passionate about. I think it's something we really need to include in our work as college advisors. I know you do work with college students. There's the whole realm of executive functioning skills. EF coaching has really grown in the college space, and I think that's exciting. So he's going to come talk about that. And then in October, we are going to have a part one, part two focused on AI. So Jeffrey Neal, who is a counselor at Graded in Sao Paulo, Brazil, is going to walk through a whole AI literacy for adults. And then we're going to have a second part, AI literacy for students. And in between, Betsy Ellsworth is going to join me and hopefully a panel. She's working on that. And we're going to talk about strategic enrollment management. And this is another kind of that hidden, she described it as the iceberg. You know, what we see is just a little portion on the top. The strategic enrollment management is the whole portion of the iceberg underneath. So that'll round out the September and October. So thank you very much, Hannah, again. And thank you everyone for being here today. It's always great to have you. I have the best audience in the world. So
You do.
watch for the email, watch for the show notes. Hannah has given me tons of resources, so we'll be able to share all of those as well.